Park's own Journal of Arts and Letters. And we want to thank the library for hosting us this evening and allowing us to have our program here. And we have 3 panelists that I think will definitely be very interesting and certainly help you tackle tonight's burning question, wrestling the manuscript. Many of us are poets, novelists, short story writers, all writers of all flavors and shapes and sizes. And if you want to send your baby into the world, what's the best way? These people are publishers as well as authors, and so they can certainly best address on what you should do, what are going to be improve your chances for getting your manuscript published, and how you can put it together and make it polished to get it to the publisher. But let me introduce our panelists. On the far, in the green hat, we have Jacob Knabb. He is editor-in-chief and co-owner of Curbside, Splendor Publishing. He teaches courses in publishing and creative writing at Lake Forest College. He also likes to karaoke and to take portraits of people. However, we won't be offering karaoke tonight. He will just be talking about...
Only if you buy a book.
Oh, if you buy a book, you'll do karaoke. Okay, excellent. Fabulous. In the middle, we have Andrea Witzke. She now is dividing her time between London and Chicago. She writes poetry, fiction, essays, and academic work, and is particularly interested in the places in which cultures, ideas, and genres intersect. She is the author of a poetry collection, To Find a New Beauty, that was published by Goldwake Press in 2012. Her work is forthcoming or has recently appeared in such places as Mid-American Review, Southeast Review, Nimrod, Bellevue Literary Review, Poetry East, Tupelo Quarterly, Crabb Orchard Review, Spoon River Poetry Review, Fiction Southeast, and the Chronicle of Higher Education. Her academic work on poetry and social change has been included in books published by SUNY Press and Palgrave Macmillan. She's been a finalist, a runner-up, and an honorable mention in several recent writing awards, including Southeast Review's Gearhart Poetry Prize, Black Lawrence Press's Hudson Award for a second book of poetry, Rojo's Clarissa Dalloway Book Prize for her first novel, and the 2014 Calvino Prize for her short fiction. And then in the teal t-shirt, is that what that is? Okay. CJ Laity is the owner of Chicago Poetry Press, which publishes the annual Journal of Modern Poetry, now in its 18th edition. Over the last few years, the press has published full-length poetry volumes written by Illinois poets Joseph Kuhn-Carey, Donna McCord, and myself included, Jennifer Dotson. CJ Laity has been publishing and promoting poetry in Chicago for over 25 years, both in print and online. Chicago Poetry Press can be found online at chicagopoetry.com, chicagopoetry.net, or chicagopoetry.org. Chicago Poetry Press does not accept unsolicited manuscripts. Oh, you do?
Yes. I don't know if I typed it wrong, but...
Poetry Press does accept unsolicited manuscripts, so you may have a shot. There's a, I guess I should also mention that tonight's program, my idea is we've got some, I've already established sort of some questions with our panelists, and that they've been thinking hard about their answers. And then, so we'll go through those questions, and then we'll open it up to questions that you may have, things that you felt weren't answered or that you haven't, and then we'll actually, after about an hour, we'll turn off the camera and we'll just go into the other room where they do have some books for sale, and you can talk to them one-on-one about their publishing question and any personal questions you want to expand on, ask for further information. So that's how we're going to organize the program this evening, and thank you so much. And did I forget to introduce myself? I'm Jennifer Dotson. I got so excited with the introductions, I forgot to get started with things. Who am I? The very first question that I wanted to ask was, what's the most important thing you look for in a manuscript? CJ, you're closest to me, you can get started.
Well, I think you have to realize the goal of a publisher is to sell books. So the first thing I'm going to look at is this book going to sell? You might have the most brilliant poetry in the world, and I might love to publish it, but if nobody's going to buy it because because there's no angle to it, or heard of you. Many different reasons. I might not want to publish it. So there's many ways that you could convince me that people are going to buy it. You could pitch me why they're going to buy it. For instance, one of the books I have back here, Postcards from Poland, he did a wonderful job pitching me. We're going to distribute this in Polish museums. The Polish people are going to love it. People who love travel poetry are going to love it. And I said, you're making a lot of sense. And I published his book because he convinced me people who were going to want to buy it. And it has sold a lot of copies. I mean, the quality of the writing, of course. If it's not good writing, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to publish it. But quality of the writing isn't the only thing. So another way is you might even just develop your own following. The way to do that is go out, do readings, make kind of a name for yourself, have a little following, and convince the publisher, well, 10,000 people belong to my blog, maybe. 100,000 people are friends with me on Twitter. I can move some books. Sam, that might be another way. But I mean that's just me.
So CJ's saying saleability is...
Yeah, saleability. Am I going to be able to sell a book?
Jacob, what do you look for?
Oh, well, I mean, my press is kind of an odd duck in that it's large for an indie, but obviously small for a sort of New York-funded Big Five press. So we can't really compete with a Big Five publisher and don't particularly try. We do trade paper, meaning we publish books that are meant to go out to all the trades and would ideally be reviewed by places like New York Times or the Washington Post, and also would be available in whatever bookstore you may go to. But our kinds of books that we publish typically are a little different than what a lot of the sort of Big Five presses look for. They often want a built-in audience, a famous celebrity's memoir, or a piece of writing by someone with a larger hook, like, if you could have Lena Dunham give you a collection, for example, of essays, that's like a dream book for a Big Five publisher. Not that I would turn that book down, of course. We sort of look at, for our press, we have to have a niche that we explore as a publisher. Most indies do. If you look at independent presses, either small or large, and CJ of course fits into this box as well, they tend to look for certain kinds of stories or poems or essays or memoirs, and it really helps to know the landscape a little bit. So if you know my press, you know that we, for example, really like personal essays. Some of our more successful books, Megan Steelstra, Sam Irby, have been personal essays. We really like gritty realism. Bill Hillman and Eric Hoover, for example, fit into that box. We like voice-driven work. We particularly like pieces that have a very strong narrative presence, and we like storytelling. Even in our poetry, to some extent, we like narrative work. Curbside isn't exactly a poetry press proper, though we do publish poetry. We have an imprint called Artifice that handles experimental poetry for us, and we sort of funnel our poetry projects through Artifice largely. And we have another imprint called Dark House that handles sci-fi or speculative or horror, which tends to have larger sales hooks, of course, but still must be literary for us to publish it. So the kinds of books that we look for, honestly, are books that have some sort of juice or life to them, that are telling a story we don't expect to hear, that are taking chances. We'd much rather work with an author who's wildly ambitious but needs some editorial feedback and some fine-tuning than someone who's very, traditionally clean and well put together manuscript-wise, but is telling another story about a sad 65-year-old professor. There's enough of those books out there, and we don't want to publish them. We also really strive for diversity, and our track record is really strong in that regard. We publish a lot of ethnicities and genders and sort of gender identities, and so this is very important to us as well. And I think it helps to sort of know that. I can talk more about that, but I don't want to talk too often.
So actually what you're saying, though, is an aspiring author really should do their homework.
Oh, yes.
Before they even send out a manuscript and sort of investigate what are the different presses out there and where would their manuscript fit best.
I completely agree with that statement. I think you really do need to do the work. Sort of blanket kind of carpet bombing, blanket submission, sending out stuff wildly everywhere. You're just going to waste a lot of energy. Most places won't take the work, and some places may actually have guidelines that state very clearly they don't want the kinds of things you're submitting, which will make them angry. free, and then you might get a black mark with that press. It's definitely good to sort of have a sense of things. And the classic advice that you probably have heard before is, go to the library, go to the bookstore, go to Amazon, look who publishes the books that you like, and those places are apt to like your work. Taste tends to sort of lend itself in that way. Or hit a trade show. Go to like AWP or the Heartland Fall Forum here in Chicago, or the pop-up book fairs we host from time to time in Chicago. You can go to these kinds of events and see what publishers are there and meet them, see their books, look at the covers, that kind of stuff. You work your butt off on a book, and then a lot of people want to take a shortcut when it comes to sort of everything else. And the nature of the modern publishing landscape is that this is really unrealistic. The odds of you sending out to the first agent, that agent saying, "Holy shit, I must publish it," and then getting you a $50,000 advance, that doesn't happen hardly ever. It does, sure, it happens, but boy, it's rare. And really, you kind of need to cater, your pitches, and you need to know who your market is and what you're looking for. And to some extent, what CJ is saying is true also. We like energetic authors. We're an indie, and we sort of live or die by our books and our authors, and we can't really afford an author who says, "There you go, contact me in 6 months with a check." We need someone who will promote, who knows who their readers are, who reaches out to them, who's active in social media, who's willing to tour, who wants to talk about work, wants to meet and connect with audiences. That stuff carries tremendous weight with lots of publishers, and there are two here who have said that. So I think it's good to be mindful of that.
And I know, have you looked, you're with RHINO.
Yeah, and I can certainly respond from the very different hats that I wear. I'm an editor with RHINO Poetry. There's certainly things that we're looking for in submissions. But also, I could speak secondly about the very different types of work that I write, maybe more from your perspective as well as a writer. I have an academic manuscript. I have a novel, my first novel, which is actually in the hands of an agent who asked for revisions recently. But that's a very different market from the poetry market, which I have my second and third manuscript now ready to circulate. And so I guess first of all, I'll just talk very briefly about, as an editor, we are looking for submissions always that are ready. It does sometimes feel as if some writers want to be published so badly that they sort of send their work out randomly, the carpet bombing. It certainly happens with literary journals as well. When really, I think one of the things that writers need to do is take time with their work and make sure their work is ready and really at the level that it needs to be before sending out either a full manuscript or an individual poem. And those quality submissions do stand out because there are a lot of sloppy submissions, and I'm sure you guys get this a lot too. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not something of promise in those books or in those individual poems, but they're just not ready. So I think that being ready with your work is very important, but I also definitely agree with Jacob that you've got to know the market. It is a minefield. It really is. And all the fiction market, which I'm in, is very different from the academic market, which is very different from the poetry market. So there's different things I could say about each, but all I can say is it takes a lot of work. Hours and hours of work, just studying the presses that you are interested in and deciding what sort of press is right for your particular work. That's so important. You want some sort of symbiotic relationship between what the editors are looking for and what you produce. So there is that. Knowing your market and being willing to do that research, and that is time consuming.
Now, this is a scary question. What earns an automatic rejection? Is there, or have you ever, just like, do you have like a personal rule that you would, I don't know.
Things are really weird now that we have the internet. I sometimes just get somebody emailing me a bunch of poems. There's no cover letter. They're not even saying this is for your Journal of Modern Poetry, volume 18, or whatever it's for. Don't do that. if the submission does not include a proper cover letter, hi, my name is so-and-so, these are my little bit of credentials, I really think my work would fit in with you for such a, don't do 30 pages, one page cover letter. I want a cover letter. If I don't get a cover letter, it shows I'm not being respected. They're not addressing me as a human being. So why should I look at this manuscript? Or I also do, individual poems for the anthology. And then, let's say you send me a manuscript, let's just be honest. If I start reading I publish stuff I like. I want other people to like it too, and I want it to sell, but if I don't like the poetry, and this goes right to what Jacob was saying. If you're gonna send me something, why not show me a little respect? Buy one of my books first. Find out what I've published in the past. You're gonna get a real good example of what I like if you buy one of my Journal of Modern Poetries. You're gonna see if you're gonna fit in with that of what I'm looking for. I typically don't do a lot of rhymey, sing-songy type of stuff. So if that's what you write, you want to find someone who publishes like verse like that. I don't really do it very often. Sometimes I do, but on the rare occasion, it's got to be really, really, really good like verse, for me to stretch that far. So I guess that's what I'm saying. If I read the first 5 poems of your manuscript and I'm not getting a expression erection, poetry erection off of it, it's going to be rejected. So it just goes again to what Jacob said. Find out what the publisher is publishing, what is published in the past, figure out if your work kind of fits in, and choose the ones where you have the best shot at. Just don't randomly send stuff to people with your fingers crossed because you believe you're the best, or you worked 10 years on this manuscript, thus they should recognize your hard work. They don't know how long you spent on it. They're going to read 5 pages, find out if they like it or not, and that's the end. If they like the first 5 pages, they're going to read the rest of it. That's where it begins and ends.
Jacob, automatic rejection.
Before I started doing Curbside, I was an editor for the Chicago magazine for ACM, which is a long-standing literary journal here in the Chicago area. Some of you may be familiar with. And the most amazingly horrifying thing I ever saw, well, I saw a lot. It's a big slush pile. You get a lot of submissions. Some real intensely strange stuff came through. For a while, I thought about doing like a totally anonymous zine of like the most horrifyingly strange things we got, just putting it in Quimby's and seeing what happened. But never really did that. But somebody actually sent some poems, and they mistakenly included their handwritten guide to journals they wanted to submit to. And they had everything ranked according to how good or bad they were. Oh, no. And all their thoughts about the stuff they published and the flaws and warts of those presses. And of course, we were in like the 3rd tier, so, well, we're not gonna, don't do that.
Okay.
It was handwritten especially, so they didn't have copies, They just lost all that work.
Oh my goodness.
Honestly, automatic rejections, we have a pretty, we're not like so focused that we only publish one kind of book again and again and again. You can sort of understand what like a Jim Carrey movie is going to be like, and where the comedy is going to come from if you're watching, or like an Adam Sandler film. We're not like sort of limited in that regard that we have the one thing we do and we do it over and over again. But we do have a clear aesthetic as a press, and honestly, just things that don't match. Like a feel good, like we would never publish Marley and Me. That's a book that sold like hotcakes. A lot of presses would just die for a book like that. I would have rejected that immediately. It doesn't work for us. It doesn't work. It doesn't fit our vision. It's just not ours. It just doesn't make sense. My publisher would probably smack me in the back of the head for saying that. Because he's got money, he's got some skin in this game, he'd like a Marley and Me. But, I just wouldn't be interested in such a thing. I think formality does matter, even in this age of instant access and the ability to sort of cyber stalk and track almost anybody down in any way. Okay. I think you still need to maintain a sheen of formality. I think you need to learn the editors' names, get them right, spell them right. One of the most famous writers right now, as far as young and exciting writers, is Roxane Gay. And for a long time, her tagline was Roxanne with one N. because everyone would misspell her name, and that drove her crazy. They would submit work to her and not even bother to spell her name right. It's like, that's just, you know what I mean? Like, sorry, but I don't care what you do at this point. You don't have the respect level required, I don't think. And so that does matter. I mean, the cover letter really does matter. That doesn't mean you should overdo it to make yourself out to be, you know, a blend of Ring Lardner and Woody Allen and a little Hemingway and Faulkner thrown in, and maybe some Joyce Carol Oates in your genre mood, you know?
Yeah, be humble.
Yeah, you don't want to overdo it, right? You don't want to like overgloss the thing. But I think it's be clear and be sort of concise about what you do and be respectful and learn the names of the editors and address it to them. And that really helps. I will give you a chance at that point, I think, you know. And failure to do that sort of, okay, there's so many people out there with talent that will bother, you know.
I certainly think as a poetry editor at RHINO, again, I think an automatic rejection would go to any work that's sloppy or there's grammatical errors and the layout is you know, uneven or sloppy or using different size fonts, you know, that sort of thing. It's a sign of kind of amateur work, I'll be honest. And this is something that a lot of new writers often need to hear, you know, is poems really, it's very rare that a poem needs to be center-spaced, but that is actually...
would you publish a center-aligned poem?
Almost never, unless there was something pressing about the need for it to be centered. But it is a sign of a novice writer, and I remember my own first poems. I read a couple that were, you wouldn't want to see them.
I used some different sized fonts and some, like this word should be in impact bold, you know?
Don't use cursive fonts, ever. You're not impressing anybody. When I get that, I automatically just block everything and turn it into a regular font so I can read it. So
you know, and I think that is what we're saying too about the professionalism. It's the look of the letter and the look of the submission as well. With a poetry submission, you don't need to give us a lot of information, a very short bio, and a please would you consider publishing these poems, and editors' names would suffice. But send your very, very best work. And this is something you should do no matter what magazine you're sending to. And if you only have 5 poems that you feel are your very best, then send them out very selectively and then just work on creating new poems and building your repertoire. I mean, as far as putting together your own manuscript, I mean, this is something that I believe very, very strongly as a writer and as an editor too. You need to have a good portion of the poems in a poetry manuscript published before you even worry about sending that whole manuscript out to a press. You need to test the waters. You need to test your poems. You need to see which poems work and which ones are getting rejected or which ones are near misses, and learn from those. I was actually saying at dinner earlier that I'm glad some of my poems were rejected early on, because it gave me a chance to revise and improve and revise and improve, and then get the good rejections, the almost theirs. But if I had had those poems accepted on the first shot, they wouldn't be the poems they are now. So I'm grateful for editors being very choosy, and it's not easy. Again, you'll get a lot of rejection. I don't think in any profession do we face rejection as often as we do as writers. So you have to develop that sort of
maybe telemarketing.
We were talking.
Campaigning.
That's true.
Knocking on doors.
But the difference is our poetry is a little piece of us, you know, handed to the world.
It hurts a lot more.
We're doing marketing.
Trying to sell shingles and you don't sell it. Well, whatever. I'll call Bill in Tulsa and try him.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a time when simultaneous submissions were a no-fly. Mm-hmm. And there are still going to be some standbys that will believe that, like you send me the work you send me and you send to no one else. But I think that's kind of gone the way of the worm a lot in the last 20 years. I think people understand that most places can't afford to pay, and then, you know, it's tough, and so much of the job world depends on those publications. I think people have really loosened that one. I don't know if some of you have that belief, but I think you could sort of let that go to some extent. It is polite to say this is a simultaneous submission and indicate that you'll let them know if it's accepted. That's perfectly fine, and you should do that, but I don't think you should feel like that's going to automatically reject your work. There was definitely a time where that would, though.
It's so true.
You know,
And in fact, I do believe that you should be, you know, those 5 poems that you feel are your best, yes, send them out to, you know, maybe 10 places.
Yep.
Because you may very well get 10 rejections on the first round anyway.
Right.
Be prepared for that, but don't lose faith and send them out again. But it's much more exciting waiting for 10 answers
than one.
because you're
uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable, yeah.
We really liked your poem. Oh, it was in Plowshares last month. I didn't mention that.
I liked it too.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to focus, let's see, I guess my questions were more on the negative side. What are, say, your top 3 suggestions or tips for success that you suggest a first-time author do?
Why don't you start this time?
Yeah, start in a different order.
Well, as a writer, as a poet who puts together her own manuscripts, I do believe a big part of it is the cohesion of the entire text. I write a lot, and I have a lot of poems, but a lot of them do not fit into either of the 2 manuscripts that I'm working on right now, and I just have to, accept that. I think a lot of times writers try to stuff everything they have into a single collection, especially when a poem was published in a great place.
You want to get that in the acknowledgements,
You do.
right?
You want to get it in the acknowledgements, but it doesn't fit, and you know it doesn't fit. So one thing I would say is look at your poems carefully. I put them all over the floor of my study, and I try to see if there's a theme running through my work. I try to talk to other poets and get them to tell me what their current sort of group of poems is about, what the sort of current thread is moving through them. And then I try to do the same, articulate what it is that I'm working on right now and why those poems hold together the way that they do. But I have to be brutal. I really do. I can tell you my first poetry collection went through many forms, many versions. And I'm glad, again, that it didn't get picked up earlier because I was able to be a little more selective with what I put in there. My current, the second one and the third one, but the second one in particular, I've been able to work through a lot more quickly, though, because I feel like I know what I'm doing now.
Right.
I was, pretty unsure of what I was doing the first time around, and I feel that you gain knowledge through the actual act of putting together these manuscripts, even if they don't work in each, sort of version that you put together.
My tip would be don't isolate yourself. Let someone else read your work.
Yes. Yeah.
You're too close to your work. You're way too close to your own work to judge it, to judge whether it's reaching.
Are you saying before you send out your manuscript, you're saying share it with them?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of people are scared. I shouldn't share it somehow. That defiles the fact that somebody's already seen it, it's not published. No, share it. Whether it's with a friend, who should be a literary friend, but even better, go to a workshop, join workshops, workshop the manuscript. You need other eyes to see that you're too close to your work. What you think is your best poem is probably not your best poem. Some poem you disregarded as something you wrote in 30 seconds. That's probably your best poem. Somebody reads that and says, wow. You can't see that because you're too close to the work. So I would say don't isolate yourself. Go out. If you get an opportunity, do poetry readings. There's a lot to be said about hearing your own work read aloud, even when you're reading it yourself aloud. You really can find where the mistakes are, where it's not flowing. I've written a few fiction books, and I've literally sat there day by day, chapter by chapter, reading my own fiction to myself, every word of it, and sometimes 2 or 3 times until I was coming out of my ears and I didn't even want to look at it anymore. But by doing that, I saw where it wasn't working. I saw, well, the voice just changed here. Why? I got to work on this. I got to fix the voice here. But reading your own work and reading it to an audience and hearing how people respond to it. One thing that amazes me sometimes is I'll write a poem. I don't know it's funny, and I'll read it in front and people are laughing. And now when they buy your book, they're gonna read it through their eyes. They're not reading it through your eyes. So it's important to get that audience reaction. Why is this poem funny? You know what I'm saying? I didn't intend it to be funny, but it's funny, and that's not bad. You're getting a reaction from somebody, and then you realize why you were funny. You might even decide, hey, let me write